Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Korean Atlanta Mentorship. And in this video, we're going to talk about the benefits of avoiding or not living in a big city. So any sort of famous metropolitan area that you can easily find in a map, like New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, um, in many countries where it's the capital. And I just want to discuss, what the benefits are about why you should avoid them um, as much as possible. So, in different languages, there are certain words that have certain meanings that we don't have in our own language. So, for example, in German, I think there's I don't know how you say it, Schadenfreude. So it says pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. And in English, we don't have an exact word to say that. But one thing I do want to mention in the Korean language is that I don't know if you call it an acronym or a saying, but there's basically a saying that, and each letter represents a part of a word. So cha, it means cold. So actually, let me explain this. So there's three letters here, or three parts of a word here. Cha do nam. That's what this actually says if you don't know Korean. And basically it translates into like cold city man, right? So this last part is man. And then another saying that kind of is the opposite of that is dashi nam. So it's like a abbreviation of a phrase called 따뜻한 시골 남자. And then here, 차도남, that's short for 차가운 도시 남자. That means cold city man and versus warm countryside man. Now, my parents are from Korea, but they're from the countryside, right? And I feel like one of the reasons why they have a different, let's say, personality type from many of the Korean people I've met is because they're from the countryside, right? And so I just find it amazing that this saying even exists, right? So it just kind of people are aware in the words and language that people in cities have a cold nature and character towards them versus people in more rural areas. And I myself live in a small town. Now, I don't live in like the rural areas of Georgia, but I live in a small town that's a new subdivision. So it's not like I'm in the countryside. I just, I don't even know any of my neighbors, to be honest, but I would prefer it here than to live in a big city like Los Angeles or San Francisco. So one of the reasons why I would never live in a place like San Francisco, even if I were making, let's say, about $300,000, is because um, people just look at how much money you make rather than how much money you keep. So if you're making $300,000 in San Francisco, it could still mean you're living paycheck to paycheck, right? And so it's kind of like one of the biggest disadvantages of living in like the big cities. uh, It's just that everything's so expensive, so people get impressed that, oh, they're making so much money when really they're not. And that's what happens to a lot of people too. Even doctors. Doctors, from my understanding, are pretty, they make good money, but a lot of them are living paycheck to paycheck. Not all of them, but I think a good number of them. So we'll just kind of analyze this thumbnail. So this is what I wanted to do. And I've never really done this before, but I wanted to analyze like every single little part of this thumbnail and why I added that there. So I think the biggest shock that maybe culture shock that I remember experiencing going to a big city is how nothing really made sense to me, right? So I lived in a nice, pretty well-to-do suburb, and I remember like the whole sentiment is like, oh, like especially when we're teenagers. I mean, I never felt this, but I remember everybody else I talked to is like their dream is to go to Los Angeles or their dream is to go to New York City, and I felt very disappointed what I experienced when I went to the city of Los Angeles. Now, other than some pretty decent Korean barbecue, which you can get in nearby cities like Buena Park, that's pretty much good, but nobody just wants to go there because it's not, quote, K-Town, even though it is K-Town. Um, eh, there really was nothing for me there. And I spent a good time period just wondering why am I here and why is everyone so hyped up about this, right? So the first disadvantage of living in a big city is that you just have no space, right? So look at this character right here, where he's just cramped, right? It's cramped. He lives in an apartment that's pretty expensive, and I remember reading like an article many years ago about a guy who paid $400 to live in a box or something like that in an apartment in San Francisco. Somebody was charging $400 and he agreed to it, but then somehow the city found out and shut it down, right? But just because there's so many people in so little space, people have to pay premium prices for, a small place to rent, and that's like a phenomenon, especially common in New York City. And I've never been to New York City, but I ain't never gonna go because I don't want to experience that. I like big open spaces. I like having a nice big house where I can put my stuff wherever I want, rather than a tiny cramped place where I just feel like I'm restricted and I feel like a rat in a cage, right? All right, so let's go to the next image and kind of analyze what this means. So this is related to the living paycheck to paycheck. So even if you're making good income, you're making $300,000 in San Francisco, that's not gonna last long because you're gonna eaten up by the cost of living, maybe taxes. People get so impressed with themselves, and maybe it's like a stroke of their ego that they like making a big paycheck. But to be honest, I'd rather live in a place where it's like, okay, I'm making $150,000 a year, but the houses are only like $200,000. Whereas like in San Francisco, maybe you make 300,000 a year, but the houses are like $1-2 million houses, and a condo costs, one bedroom condo costs 500,000. That's a no thanks for me, right? So definitely not gonna live there. But I think just the cost of living, the insane cost of living of the cities just makes no sense to me, and that's why it's like you start at high and then you're just living paycheck to paycheck. Next one here, I just find big cities to just kind of be a little bit gloomy, a little bit too sterile. You talk to people, and I put this little happy face that's kind of melting away. And to me, that kind of is a representation of a lot of forced positivity you'll see. Um, I haven't been to the city of Los Angeles in a long time, but I remember when I was there, I was disgusted by the forced positivity you kind of encountered, but it was just a horrible place. In fact, if you drive downtown LA, it's just homeless people after homeless people, but everybody seemed to have like a forced positivity to them, and I just couldn't take it. And the environment there is, like I said, a sterile environment, and I think you do best just to avoid those types of places, especially you have that feeling where you're lonely in a crowd, very common in a big city, which leads to my next point is a lot of people, it's not a coincidence that a lot of people in our society are depressed. And I know people who will give me a forced positive smile, and then later I found out that they're depressed, but they'll still give me that forced positive smile, right? I think a lot of times what happens is that we can't be our true selves, and especially in a big city where people just come and go, there's no one really there for you to support you. In fact, I'd rather be alone, rather than just be around people who um, force their, happiness towards me and say, well, I'm so glad to meet you, and then like you give them a call and they're nowhere to be found. A lot of flaking, especially in the city of Los Angeles. I don't know about other places, but pretty bad there. People, especially these days, no matter where you go, even in the small towns, people don't really care about each other. But it's worse in the big city, right? It's like, so it's kind of the question I always ask is like, would I rather have like be in an environment that's kind of bad or just awful, like extremely awful? I'll just take kind of bad. You know what I'm saying? But when you go to the big cities, it's just extremely awful, right? All right. So this is just kind of a symbolism of just you're trapped, and it's kind of similar to here, to this little image, but that you're depressed and maybe it's like a gloomy, rainy feeling. I think this is I thought this was rain, but now that I look at it further, it's just more streaks on a bottle, maybe. But this makes sense to me if it's rain, because rain is kind of associated with depression. And then the next image is just the awful traffic jams, especially the city of Los Angeles. I remember that it would, whenever I entered the city, it was just so awful. Like if I wanted to go to point A to point B here in Atlanta, it would take me like 15 minutes. In Los Angeles, it would take me like 3 hours. And it's just basically a combination of things. Small living spaces. I like big living spaces. Your money doesn't last, and I like it when I make money and I have plenty of money, more than I have plenty of month. They have that saying, do you have more month or do you have more check? Right? So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you got more month than you have check. But I like having more check than I have month. And just the forced positivity, people withering away in a gloomy environment, not into that, but and then other thing too is just there's so many depressed people out there. There's so many depressed people. Here's the other thing too. There's so many depressed people suffering in silence. And the really hardest part is when you reach out to them and tell it, hey, let's, work together and succeed together. They don't know how to handle that, just because I think people are raised in a way where the people around them, they consider themselves to be independent, and not understanding that the way you succeed is through teamwork, right? Um, and then here, like I would never ever spend time um, in 3 hour traffic ever again. Worst traffic ever. So I'm glad that I'm in a position where I could just kind of stay home, relax, and if I wouldn't ever have to drive a car, even in the U.S., if I really made an effort. But yeah, so just let's just kind of go to this list right here. So small spaces, high cost of living, forced smiles, depression, traffic. I think all of these five, they're all kind of related to each other. And then when you have them and you have to experience that on a daily basis, then that's a recipe for disaster. So that's why I recommend, my personal opinion, you don't have to take it, is just that to avoid the big cities. Why would you want to live in a place, like San Francisco, where even Whole Foods dropped out after like having they probably spent millions of dollars in to be in I think downtown San Francisco, and they bailed after a year because there's the issue of security. But yeah. All right. So this is Korean Atlanta mentorship. This is just, my take on why big cities should be avoided. You'll probably have a much better quality of life if you avoid it. Now, a lot of young people are kind of delusional about, quote, it's their dream to live in a big city when there's, all the opportunity is like through the internet nowadays. You know what I'm saying? All right. So if you're interested in joining our mentorship group, go ahead and click the Google link form below, or you can go ahead and go to the About Us section in the YouTube channel and send us an email saying that you're interested in joining. And we'll get on a Zoom call with you, see if you're a good fit. So have a great day, and we'll speak next time.